kind of a world do we want to live in? From Winnipeg's North End, we open the difficult and uncomfortable conversations about crime, addiction, poverty, and more. We feature voices of those with first-hand experience and dive into the bold and messy discussions that lead to healing and transformation. This is Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. All right, I'm happy to be sitting here with Harvey Rempel and for another round of Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. So what this is about, it's a conversation about with the well-being of our community front and center, us looking at issues that face our community, and having a creative, open conversation about how we got here, where things are going. Harvey, give us a little bit of a profile on who you are, how you came to be involved at Inner City Youth Alive, and your role here, just under 30 seconds.
All right. Hello, I'm Harvey. I grew up in Winnipeg, grew up in a pretty sheltered community and environment. I was voted the most innocent person in my high school class, for better or worse. And I struggled with doubt as a teenager, like many people, when kind of taking their faith in a more personal way, and had a mentor kind of suggest that I maybe find a place where I could get involved, where I could live out my faith in a practical, tangible way. So I started volunteering at an inner city youth drop-in when I was about 17 or 18, and fell in love immediately with the kids that were coming from very different worlds than I was, and have been moving in that direction ever since. Spent some time living in Detroit in the inner city, and did an internship there, and spent some time traveling around inner cities all over the U.S., did seminary, intercultural mission degree, and kind of the whole time kept praying that God would lead me to a inner city neighborhood that I could commit to and grow to learn from and grow to love and serve. And I thought that might be back in Detroit or in California somewhere, but I ended up back in Winnipeg in the North End here, where I've been now for a little over 20 years and been working here as a community minister with Inner City Youth Alive for a little over 17 years now. And I'll just explain very briefly community ministry. So at Inner City, we have a whole bunch of things going on. We have drop-in, we have wilderness camp up north, we have job training, mentoring, construction program, step-up construction. We have engage education, walking alongside youth and helping them re-engage in the education system. We have different discipleship clubs and programs going on. And then there's also a team of us. There's about 6 of us right now who work as community ministers, or sometimes people use the term hood pastor, and just walking alongside youth and their families or individuals in the day-to-day joys of life, in the day-to-day challenges, and just the whole thing is about nurturing relationships, earning trust, and earning the right to speak into people's lives. So it means being there in the joys of life, in the day-to-day grinds of life, and also in the difficult times in life, and just practicing a ministry of presence. And we're there helping kids get back in school if they've been kicked out, or visiting friends in jail, helping navigate the labyrinth of the justice system. Sometimes we're doing funerals for friends and loved ones that have passed away. Other times it's just hanging out, building relationships, going for lots of Slurpees, and just listening and connecting. And especially for those of us who've been here for a while now, some of the teens that we got to know 15 years ago are now in their, late 20s, early 30s, and are now, learning what it means to be parents, or struggling with their own addictions, or working and, trying to find ways to give back. So,
yeah. Hey, so it's you've experienced Harvey, for those of you who don't know, has a gray beard, so that tells you have some wisdom. You started at the young age of 17, and here you are now. I'm curious to know what's changed. What's the overall changes that you're seeing in the community? The goal is we kind of want to get our listeners to understand what's happening on the street level, what you're seeing day to day, and the kind of things that maybe folks in the suburbs may not know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a very large question. I would say, at least speaking of our neighborhood here in the North End in Winnipeg, I think when I first came in the year 2000, it was kind of at a somewhat of a low point. There had been redlining, there had been a lot of houses that had been set on fire. There was, I think, one insurance company in the entire country that would insure houses or buildings in our postal code zone. There had been a lot of gang activity and gang violence that had started to become entrenched in the neighborhood, and quite a bit of, and the whole, crack dealing and stuff like that was taken off, and it was a pretty low point. I think there was a bunch of stuff that was happening over those next 7, 8, 9 years that was moving things in a healthier direction. There was quite a bit of collaboration in the community with North End Community Renewal Corporation and building up the housing stock, renovating a bunch of houses, building up new housing stock. Different organizations, like yourself included, with some of the others, with Mama Way, North End Community Renewal Corporation, were kind of encouraging or talking to different organizations. And then the Assiniboine Credit Union moved back into the neighborhood after pretty much all the banks had moved out. And most of our organizations pooled our resources in some of those to support them. The housing stock was being built up. There was a move in a healthy direction and a more hopeful direction, it felt. There were still lots of challenges and stuff, but then about, I'd say 7 years ago, meth hit with such a force that, I've often read and talked to people where you can just see year by year when crack first hit in the cities in the U.S. In different cities, it hit in 86 or 87 or 88 or even earlier, and just see the upsurge in violence and especially homicide and in the drug wars that happened. And you just hear, I remember there's even songs or albums about talking about before crack came, or books of photography. And this is the closest that I've personally experienced to that, where you could very much clearly kind of pinpoint to before and after when meth hit. And all of a sudden, so many of our friends started struggling with meth addictions, and it's a different kind of addiction, and it's a slower kind of downhill trajectory, and within a few months people have kind of burnt many of their bridges with family and friends, and are kind of just couch surfing from house to house, living in trap houses. And more people started using IV, like needles, which never really had been a big thing in Winnipeg. More and more people started to become comfortable with that. And then, of course, with it, there comes all the paranoia and some of the random nature of the violence, which is very different than it used to be. People would always ask about, isn't it dangerous to live in the North End? And I would often tell people, like, if you're not part of a gang or involved in the drug world, and you're not hanging out at all night drinking parties, chances of something happening to you aren't really that much higher than in other neighborhoods, aside from like property crime is kind of a given. But I feel like that's different now. Like, guys who I know who were gang members, who were like some of the most feared guys in the neighborhood, they're like, I'm not walking around at night alone now, because when people are struggling with these addictions and with some of the paranoia and hallucinations and violence that at times can come with it in parts of the cycle, people just imagine that they're being attacked or that they're being followed or that and can get incredibly violent. And there's been way more random attacks and random violence than ever before. Like that seems completely different than it was. So just to follow that a little bit further, many more people are struggling with addiction. There's been tons of cuts in our health system in our province, and special mental health. And then on top of all of that, then COVID hit, and so many of the resources that were available were either shut down completely or were just incredibly limited in their access. And then on top of that, like much of the rest of North America, opioids hit Winnipeg, and especially fentanyl right now. And because so many people had started injecting meth, all of a sudden now people were injecting fentanyl, and now there's been so many every day there's people dying of overdose in our city, in our province as well. Like the same stuff we would read in Vancouver or in Philadelphia in the past is now happening here, is happening all over.
I'm trying to picture. Thank you. That's like 20 years history in under 7 minutes. Thank you. I'm trying to picture how kind of where we are right now as a community, how that plays out for families that are not caught up in it. Like what's going on for a mom who wants to walk her kids to school, for a family member who would like to take a run out to Sev just to get a Slurpee, just doing the daily, even being in the backyard. How does that, all of what you've described there, play out?
Yeah. Well, two things come to mind. First, ours is not a neighborhood that has given up hope. And I'm very thankful for that. I feel like when I did live in Detroit, I did encounter and see some neighborhoods where there was almost no organizations, no groups, no opportunities or activities available. And sometimes I would shudder to think what some of our neighborhoods would look like if that were the case here too, where there wasn't the Bear Clan, where there wasn't, Mama Way, where there wasn't all of these different organizations that are at work in our neighborhood. But at the same time, yeah, it is a challenge. So for example, on our block where my family lives, just a few blocks from here, the other day, like last week, there was a big raid again. So the tactical unit came out with their big armored vehicle, smashed through fence surrounding this house, which had recently been split into kind of a double unit. So one of the units was full of many little children, at least I think 5 or 6 little kids. And they were quickly escorted out. The house is surrounded by a SWAT team. The whole block is out watching because it was
This is middle of the day, or this is the
middle of the
evening,
afternoon, and it was
okay.
like 42 degrees Celsius that day. It was really hot, but everybody's out on the front steps. Everybody's watching what's going on, and everybody's talking about the impact that this house, because there had been a new drug dealing operation that had set up there, and several other houses on the block, and different moms were talking to me about how they're concerned about letting their kids go to the corner store. And the mom was telling me about how one of the houses that she'd walk by, a person had come out of there chasing her with an axe. Or the other day my daughter and I had gone to the corner store, and we came home and I think found 3 people lying passed out in the grass or behind a dumpster on our way home. So
I gotta ask, how does that affect your daughter?
Yeah, it's at times scary, especially if people are really. So recently my daughter was in the backyard playing, and she just heard a woman just screaming for help, and my daughter came running in the house afraid that this woman was getting assaulted or getting attacked, whatever. And my wife went to check, and it was a woman. Sadly, thankfully she wasn't getting attacked, but sadly she was on something, and she was tearing out her own hair and just screaming at the pain of that. But was so it's that's bothersome. Or the other day, my daughter and I were driving, and there was a man in the middle of the street just completely freaking out, just screaming and throwing himself around, and those kind of sights are way more frequent than they used to be, and are disconcerting for everyone in the neighborhood. And
I'm just trying to get to the personal, because your daughter and you, I'm sure you guys debriefed what you saw, but I just know that I'm curious about the impact of that in the wider community, because sometimes because of the dramatic sort of scene is in front of us. And so you're drawn to look at somebody who happens to be caught up in a delusion or having an episodic kind of incident, and you get drawn to that. But then I always wonder about the individuals that see it and the sort of secondary trauma of seeing kind of what you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there is for sure. And I know that, so especially with a few of our neighbors who have been around a little bit longer, we've built some good relationships with them, and some are, yeah, very much describing their exasperation and frustration and anger and fear. And others are a little bit more resigned to that this is just how it is, like that, where it becomes normalized almost, where there's just people.
Is that the two ends of the continuum, where it's like normalized, just come to expect this is how it is? The other end, anger and interest in doing something. Is there a further? Sometimes I worry about, is there actually like a further end? Is there sort of vigilante potential? Like, are there people out that are thinking, I got to do something myself because no one else is doing this? I just wonder that. I worry about that sometimes.
Yeah. No, I'm sure there is that sometimes, and yeah, it's one of those things. I think the reality is many of the people who live in our neighborhood also have family or friends that are caught up in it, right? So it is different when it's personalized in that sense, where you see people that are clearly struggling, clearly hurting, and one of them might be your uncle or your cousin or your nephew or your older brother or something like that. Even last week we had our huge community block party. We had probably 1,500, 2,000 people out, and in introducing and welcoming everybody, I tried to acknowledge how many of the people there have lost loved ones over these last few years to violence or to addiction, and we wanted to be real about that and recognize that and even honor the memory of those that have passed. But at the same time, we also wanted to celebrate the North End and remind people that the North End is way more than just drugs and violence and stuff. But yeah, I was at 2 funerals this past week for young people from our community that died of overdoses, from families that have already dealt with that over the past few years.
So I had lunch with somebody from our community today, and he said he longed for the days when crack was our only problem. You referenced, it's a horrible thing to say, you referenced the normalization. Like, I sometimes wonder if the 20-year-old Harvey could be exported out to 2023, like that gap of where things were, let's say the days of crack, to where we are today. Obviously, we'd be shocked to see what we see today. But you're talking about normalization. Like, what goes on there? What are you seeing? How can what we're seeing in the community get normalized? 3 people passed out by a dumpster, trying to figure out, doing triage, who's alive, who's not. People screaming in the back alley, tearing out hair. All of these things, I mean, to the average listener, sounds like a dumpster fire. How does this get normalized?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think you could very clearly follow in the United States, in a lot of the literature and stuff like that about it, you could very clearly follow the patterns of when crack hit, with the crime rates and with especially the murder rates. And I think about our own city, where last year the murder rate was more than double what it had averaged maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I asked myself, are we okay with that? And are we okay with that doubling again in the next 5 years? Are we okay with being a city where there's an average of, over 100 people dying of violence? So I feel
Can I just expand a little on those data points? Winnipeg as a whole has a murder rate of 4.4 per 100,000. R2W, our community here, has a murder rate of 102 per 100,000. So last year, St. Boniface had 378 violent crimes, and the North End had over 4,200 violent crimes. So just to kind of give people a sense of those data points, the idea that we could double, if that was the case, and if the percentages remained, that would have us. Tijuana is the worst city in the world for violence. They're at 131 per 100,000 murders. So if we doubled, that would put us at 204 per 100,000. If it's not good math, but it's
or
just
in this neighborhood,
in our community, yeah, because it's sort of like the density, the density of crime. It tends to concentration. Yeah, thank you, concentration of crime.
Yeah, and I think none of us want that, obviously. But what are we willing to do? So I had a conversation with a woman who's the director of a treatment program in our city recently. We were trying to help a few of the young people that we are walking with to get in. They had actually been living in a vacant house just a block from here during the winter, and we found out that one of them, she was like 6 or 7 months pregnant, and Sina became 8 months pregnant. We're like, well, you can't be in a vacant trap house with no power, no electricity, no water and heat or nothing like that. We're able to help her get into a much better living situation, and she had her beautiful baby, but they're still struggling. So we're trying to get them into this treatment program. And that director, she was saying, if we're honest and calling this a drug epidemic, whether it's a meth epidemic or opioid epidemic, or a mixture of both, when there was the COVID epidemic, all of a sudden there was just, there was unlimited resources that were available to respond because it was an epidemic. Mm-hmm. But this morning, my coworker trying to help a friend get into a treatment program or even just access some help. Like there's the RAM clinics in the city, which I'm not trying to knock because we're so thankful for them, but they're only open for a few hours a day, several days a week. Now there's a few different ones, but you have to, they say, well, please come at least 2 hours early.
Can you explain for our viewers or listeners, what is a RAM clinic?
RAM clinic is rapid addictions to, rapid access to addictive medicine. So it's kind of supposed to be an on-ramp to getting supports for dealing with addictions.
Right.
So it says, all right, we open at 9:30. They're asking you, please be there at least 2 hours early because there's lineups of people waiting. I think many people in our city don't understand how difficult it is for the average person to get access to treatment, especially if you're not coming from a middle-class family where you maybe already have a home and a safe place and you have access to a bed and a phone
and you're willing to spend $30,000 maybe.
Right, it can be. There's a great movie from the 90s called Gridlocked, with Tupac and Tim Roth, where there are two heroin addicts living in Detroit, and one of their best friend, they wake up and she's overdosed and she's rushed to the hospital and they assume she's dying. And all of a sudden it's like a wake-up call for them, and they're like, oh my goodness, we're going to die too. We need to get into treatment. And it follows them around the city for a day, and all the red tape they encounter of, not having address, not having phone, not having been in detox, not having all this stuff. And they're just getting more and more desperate as the day goes on, because they know if they haven't accessed help by nightfall that they're just going to go right back to it. So the movie literally ends with them standing in a back alley across the street from the hospital, trying to figure out where they can stab each other that'll be serious enough that they'll be taken into emergency and that they'll be funneled from there into treatment, but that they don't accidentally kill each other. And I've thought of that movie so often when walking with our friends and trying to help them get treatment, because there are treatment programs out there, but you have to always have been in detox. And especially during COVID, detox beds were incredibly limited. And even aside from that, then you get on a waiting list. I have friends that call me late at night and say, I need to get into treatment now. And I am brokenhearted to tell them that's not how it works. Like, we'll call first thing in the morning, we'll get on a waiting list. You have to give a phone number, you're struggling with homelessness, so I'll give my phone number, and then we'll call every week and we'll wait. And it might be 6 or 7 weeks, and then they'll all of a sudden call and say, okay, there's a bed today till 4:00. So then I got to track you down and find you wherever, I've tried to maintain a relationship so I know kind of where you're hanging out. And then we have to go get a doctor's medical clearance. So we have to go from one walk-in to another to try and find a doctor who will do a medical clearance, and you have to usually pay for that.
You got to pass a piss test?
Not necessarily that, but you have to, it's a medical clearance to know that you're healthy enough that you're not going to all of a sudden go into medical distress while you're detoxing. I mean, it makes sense, and I'm sure there's liabilities and all that stuff, but sometimes I wish there was doctors waiting at detox that they would just do it for you as you come in or whatever, right? And because I've been with people that have a bed, we could not find a doctor that day that would, so we could get a medical clearance form, and then by the end of the day, they're like, well, the bed's been given to somebody else, you're back on the waiting list. And it just, again, for people that are surrounded by friends who are dying and hopelessness and overwhelm, it takes a lot of courage to get to that place where, like, I need to find help. And when it's not accessible, then immediately it's so easy to fall right back into that hopelessness and
well,
not care.
I mean, just the impact of being dope sick is in and of itself just an overwhelming thing you just want relief from. And so then you have to kind of have the sun aligning with the moon to get that perfect moment when you're clean, clear-minded, and then the doctors align, the treatment facility aligns, and everything. Sounds like it's almost orchestration, like it's designed to fail.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that sometimes. And I mean, I'm sure, and I mean, we've learned a lot about the systems and the processes. I know we don't know everything, and we want to continue to connect people with resources where there's even more wisdom and more access. And I know there are times when it has worked for people to get in somewhere quicker. But the reality is, for many people, that it's such an exasperating and frustrating experience. And with that dope sickness, for people who don't know, especially opioids, so especially in Winnipeg right now, what they call down is mainly fentanyl mixed with kind of anything or everything. And most people, they're not doing it because they get high off of it. They're not doing it because they enjoy it or because it's this great thing. They're doing it to try and stop from feeling awfully sick, where they're throwing up and where they have diarrhea and where they have an awful fever and flu and all these kind of things, because that's what happens with the withdrawals. So a friend of ours had been murdered last year, and I was leading the funeral, but was also connecting with the family. So I went to this trap house where they were staying to pick up the mom and the boyfriend, and they couldn't come to the funeral of their loved one who they truly cared about, but they were so dope sick that they had to first find a way to get a hit or to get high, so that they were well enough to be able to come to the funeral. It just crystallized for me how powerful that stuff is, because it's not that they didn't want to come, not that they didn't care. They were incredibly impacted by this awful death, but the addiction and the withdrawals and the pain of all of that was just so strong that they were just trapped by that. So all of that, you were just asking about normalization. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed this year in 2023 is that there are just people just passed out. I just, on a regular basis, see that everywhere. Every day I'm stopping and checking up on people. In the past, years ago, often if somebody was passed out on the sidewalk or on a boulevard somewhere, often, you would check up on them and they would be drunk and kind of were sleeping it off. And you'd be like, "You good, bro?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Okay, just make sure you're all right." But now with overdose deaths and like the, what they call, opioid poisoning being so rampant and so scary, you want to check up on people because you never know if they're actually, there's many people whose lives could be saved if somebody did check up on them and did, get Narcan or naloxone, one of my friends who has been struggling with addictions for years, talked to him like 2 days ago, and he, I think, has revived 16 people in the last while with naloxone kits. That because he's in those drug houses, it's often people dealing with addictions themselves that are doing the reviving and saving of lives and are probably experts at it. So I think that kind of just visually, that just feels, it just is something that people are just becoming used to seeing every day. The other day I had already stopped and checked on a few people that I had spotted, and then I was headed, I don't remember where I was headed, but across the intersection I could see another person passed out in the grass, and from about half a block away I saw a guy riding his bike right past him, and I thought, and I noticed the person. He stopped and turned his bike around. I'm like, oh, good, he's going to go check on him. But no, he just grabbed the guy's backpack and took off. And I'm like, oh, man.
Robbed him,
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of hearing two things, or talking about normalizing things. And then your earlier sort of comparison to the pandemic when we said, okay, we kind of had like a state of emergency. So can I kind of draw from that you're saying, all right, we've normalized this craziness when we should be declaring a state of emergency? Like, in your mind, do people in our city, politicians, people in power, are they going after this issue with enough sort of fervor, enough drive, enough will, or do you see that we should ramp this up?
Well, I don't foresee it going away anytime soon with things just left status quo. It has been continually getting worse year by year over the last 6-7 years, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years. And yeah, I mean, if nothing changes, I think that's just going to continue, and that's scary.
So I'm just thinking a bit of short-sightedness on behalf of some of our political officials, where it's pay me now or pay me later. Like if you're saying you've made a couple of projections, you've said that you could see violent crime doubling. Like if we think about where we were at 6 years ago, if we continue on this path, it could double. You're saying you don't see that this is going to slow down and improve. So then what's the path? What path? If you had a blue sky possibilities and you could wish into existence the wildest thing, what would it be? What do we need?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. I think we need way more detox beds or detox options, because there are different treatment programs around, a fair number. I don't know exactly how. I wonder sometimes, I'd be actually very curious to see the numbers of how many beds are available at many different treatment facilities, and if there's a significant bottleneck because you can't get enough people that have been detoxed to
Right.
get into that. I don't know how full Brian Oak Center is, or the new building on Talbot. I'm sorry, I forget.
Riverwood House.
House. Or, I mean, there's lots of different facilities, both,
Native Addiction Council of Manitoba here in the North End.
Exactly. I don't know how full these places are. I suspect that they're not all full. I think that they would have room, but I think there's tons of people who are wanting to get in. I think there is some space, but I guess I'm not 100% sure on that. I know that some of the places we call, they're like, yeah, we have space. We still have space available. But to get people in there, they have to have been clean for 10 days or for 14 days or for whatever the facility might be. And I know that understandably, a lot of that was limited during COVID because of all the precautions and stuff like that. But I think they could double or triple the number of spaces for people who are struggling with addiction to get into detox. I think healthy community is both the goal, but is also kind of the answer, or a huge part of the answer for people like friends of ours who friends of ours who I've known for years who were struggling with addictions, were addicted to meth, were in and out of jail, were arrested in a stolen car with a bunch of guns, and then were able to get into treatment. A friend who was able to get into the REACT program, another one who got out of jail and his girlfriend had got clean, and he was able to connect with our Step Up construction program and get into some anger management and just learn what it means to become a parent, learn what it means to become a father and a partner, and also to, learn job skills and have mentoring, and just all of a sudden imagine themselves as a dad or as a person caring for their family, providing for their family, and just seeing so much life and hope and even dreaming about the future. I mean, we see that in individuals that we know. So we know that kind of transformation and that kind of healing and hope can make a huge difference and can be a huge part of people getting free from those cycles of addiction and stuff like that. Some friends of mine who are addicts, who are on the streets, who are homeless, all of a sudden they find out that their brother or their friend just got arrested, and they're like, oh, good, like finally he'll have a chance to get clean for a bit and sober up and maybe get a bit healthier and stuff like that.
So talking about jail as a possible point of reset.
Exactly. And I mean, I don't think that that's a given, that that's always the case, but it certainly can be. I mean, in certain jails, drugs are very, very available, but which, yeah, it is a significant concern for sure. But to be kind of pulled out of this environment where it's all around you, and then having a chance to relearn, I just had a phone call from a friend this morning who is now found out that he's likely going to Stony and will be locked up for a couple of years. And I was just trying to encourage him to look into the options on the inside for treatment and for education and for, just to encourage him, because either he can get more involved in drugs and gang activity and violence while he's in there, or trying to encourage him to just imagine the possibilities of actually coming out in a bit of a better place than where he was when he went in.
Yeah, I just think about the acknowledged reality that within a community where addiction has kind of taken hold, there is community. Addicts have a sense of community on a certain level.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
But the sort of the dysfunction of the community is obviously makes it very difficult to break. So then when people make that break, you're suggesting that if there is a supportive community that can sort of take them on and give them a new sense of purpose. I know Step Up Construction has been that for so many youth right now. We're just really feeling like it's just a place where people can actually do something beyond just surviving. They can start to picture I can work, I can produce, I can create something. I heard an individual who had a long rap sheet, who did work for us in the community, did a renovation on a house here in the community. Told me that the next time people read about him, he wants them to be reading about the good things that he's contributed to his community, as opposed to that long rap sheet that the judge reads to him every time he goes to court.
Right.
And so that kind of hope.
Yeah, and obviously whoever's listening, we don't know, people are coming from all different backgrounds and experiences. But if you're not from an environment where gangs and drugs and things like that are the norm, just to imagine, so many of the youth that we know, like, it's way easier for them to get a job as a drug dealer than it is to get a job any other kind, because they have the connections, they know which cousin or which older brother or which person on the block to talk to, and the promise of money, and most people that I know who get involved in that aren't doing it because they think they can get rich, and they're not doing it to be bad. They're doing it to buy diapers for their kids, or they're doing it to try and, help supplement the household income and stuff like that. But for those that have not grown up with that, it is hard to imagine what it's like to, so many of the youth that we know, or those that are struggling with hardcore addiction, feel like they don't know anybody that is not in that world. That world becomes so isolated. They become so, it's like another reality almost, where they're just bouncing from trap house to trap house, from place to place, looking for a place to sleep, place to get high, place to buy or sell or trade, stolen bike parts or whatever it might be. And they don't know anybody. They don't have regular connections with hardly anybody that's outside of that world. So then when they do have some relationships with the community minister from here, or with a worker from a different place, or a genuine relationship that is not just where they feel like they're just a number, at times I think that can feel like a lifeline, but it also can feel it's scary, because to imagine coming back from treatment or from jail or from whatever it is, to come back and have to have cut off all of those relationships. I mean, just imagine for yourselves, if the one way to move ahead in a healthy direction was to cut off all the relationships that you have. I mean, that would be overwhelming. That would be scary. But that's often one of the only ways that people can succeed, especially for a time. They might eventually be strong enough to re-engage, but for a time, and maybe even a significant length of time, they'll have to, especially if it's families where there's generational substance abuse and stuff like that, you might have to cut yourself off from family and friends, and that is not easy, especially in a community where family is family and loyalty, and even though it's imperfect and there's brokenness in it, but family is valued hugely, and extended family and that kind of loyalty is highly respected or highly valued. It can be a very challenging thing to find a new community that is, sometimes I know people, there's many good meaning people and caring people that want to give and want to help, but you can't just write a check that just includes a person in healthy community, or you can't just donate healthy community to somebody, whatever, right? Like it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of commitment to create communities like that people can feel welcome in, and feel that they can find a place where they belong in that. But when that happens, and when we see that happen, it can be a transforming thing. And and that's what we're trying to create and trying to be part of, and trying to encourage here through our own, organization and the community that we're building, but also as we work together alongside others.
I've come to think about the term shit happens as having some theological depth to it. So, you're describing how there's just an ease with which someone can be drawn into the thing that tears their life apart. So if you're in a community where there's addiction all around you, and a lot of your friends get caught up in it, then that can just easily happen. But inversely,
and it exacerbates the impact of it. If it's not just an individual, but if it's concentrated all around you, it just,
everything's pulling on you. Mm-hmm. So then that's sort of an easy path to follow. But then the inversion of that saying, the good things don't just happen. So there's something that you infer then on someone who may have been caught up in that, and then makes that decision to step away from his whole community, his or her whole community, and do the hard road of healing and recovery. That doesn't just happen. I mean, we're hearing systems are against you. You can't. It's difficult to get into treatment. It's difficult to step away from. You have to have everything aligned, and so that road out. People that make that road, that make that journey, it speaks to the depth. Like my respect for For this young man you've referenced, that he walked away from all of that to join our Step Up crew. That says a lot about the strength of that individual, that they did that uphill battle to walk away.
And every person that we have built relationships with or we've made connections with over the years that has found themselves for many different reasons in those cycles of addiction and despair and hopelessness. When you sit down, anybody listening, if they would have a chance to sit down and talk to our friends and hear their stories and get to know them as real people, like they would, you can't help but see people differently. And I'm glad, I'm so thankful actually that after, some 20 years, whatever, that it still is an overwhelming sense of awe and honor that people would choose to open up about their lives with somebody, with me and just to share. And sometimes it's people I've known for a long time, and other times, I might be with somebody and then they just, have a new girlfriend that they just met, and she'll say hi and she'll just start pouring out whatever. And people have been through some really, really incredibly painful and difficult, traumatizing, environments, situations, incidents, some stuff that kind of is indescribable at times. And I remember a friend of ours who, from the neighborhood here, a young man who said, he always encouraged us to, he said, celebrate people's resilience, but don't celebrate their need for resilience or whatever, right? Because
interesting.
Because
it's sad that they have to.
Right, exactly. You don't want to glorify that people have to have this resilience, but we do see that resilience for sure. And when you just get to know people, even if they're, we find them passed out in the bush somewhere along the riverbank or on the sidewalk, whatever. Every person is created in the image of God. We believe that. And that means for me that even that person lying there is a better reflection of who God is than the most magnificent sunset or whatever. And then and when you actually have a chance to connect with that person or share a burger with them or a Slurpee or just sit around a campfire or go for a drive or just sit somewhere and talk and hear their stories, and you start to see that and see the value and beauty in them, and hopefully reflect that to them, because many have given up believing that about themselves. And that's a huge thing. What we're about too is walking alongside our friends and helping them to discover that God is not just another voice in a chorus condemning them, telling them they're not worth anything, that they're just going to be, like their old man or whatever, but that God is actually for them and on their side and wanting to bring healing and hope and forgiveness and restoration and new life. And when people start to internalize that, it is transformative, and it helps people break free, and also helps them realize that they have a part to play in a bigger thing that's happening, of bringing healing and transformation into our world. So there's a lot of really hard stuff, and if you focus on it too much, it's very easy to get discouraged and overwhelmed. But that's why it's also important to continually share and celebrate those stories of hope and healing that we do see, to share them with each other and encourage each other and inspire each other.
And I think too, it's in a way, when we listen, kind of hear your story of walking in our community, then there's kind of like an invitation to a journey that we put out to our people listening. Is it can be an overwhelming work, but there's something big about the small things we do as well. And I think of this quote, that we are a tree in a story about a forest. So sometimes that feels small, but there's a bigger story that's being told, and about God's wanting to draw us into full community, draw us into a full understanding of who God sees us as individuals, and a story that has so many redemptive turning points, and that we all need those. And so, thank you for your work, Harvey, in the community, and thank you for shedding light on this very important issue. And God bless you in your work, and may He give you strength. Thanks for tuning in to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change.